Have you ever been in a situation where you don't know what to shoot? Well, let me show you what I mean. Look at that, and look at that, and look at all of this.
I'm in Osaka, Japan with my friend John. The area we're in is kind of like the Times Square of Osaka, with signs and shops and people everywhere. Everything is so different, but also so cinematic. So I wanted to share some photo tips on what you can do when you're in a new area, or you're feeling stuck, or just overwhelmed with what to shoot. But also, John kind of has a thing for neon signs, and there's this one really famous sign he's desperately trying to find. So we're gonna help him out as we wander the streets of Dotonbori together. One of the main reasons you might be feeling overwhelmed is because cameras are complicated, and between all the modes that you can shoot in, the lenses that you have to pick from, the settings, it's pretty easy to make a mistake. So step number one, if you're feeling overwhelmed, is to learn the ins and outs of your camera. If it's a new camera, sit down for an hour or two, go through the menu, find an online tutorial of someone who's used your camera and can guide you through the settings. But then also just learning the exposure triangle, learning what aperture is, learning what shutter is, learning how ISO affects the brightness and the grain inside of your photos. Starting there is a good first step to not feeling overwhelmed. On this trip, I brought the Canon R5 with the 15-35. I also brought the Lumix because I wanted to try shooting in some ProRes, which I did straight to the SSD, but I also got access to the new S9, thanks to Lumix. Now, the first thing I did when I got access to the camera is I went up to my room and I sat down for 3 hours straight, just messing with the settings, figuring out how the dials work, and just setting up the camera. Now, from my perspective, this is the minimum I needed to spend just to get this camera to the point where I was comfortable using it. It's one of the main reasons that I don't tend to review a lot of cameras, because there's a lot of time and energy that's required to properly sit down and understand the ins and outs of a camera before I go ahead and either make a recommendation or not make a recommendation. And so I would say the same thing to you. When you get your camera, sit down, learn the ins and outs, set it up so that when you actually go to shoot, you're not fumbling through trying to learn how to use it.
Nailed it.
Yeah, I think I got it.
You nailed it. Okay, so photo stop number one. The first thing that we've tried or decided to do is a long exposure. So John has the S2X, and you can see that there's water behind us, and these boats keep going down, and there's a lot of people moving on either side. And so the idea with a long exposure is that you can capture the movement blurred out. So something that's longer than a second, 2 seconds. It looks good?
You can't see that, but
we can't see. Nice. Oh no, maybe we can see. All right, well, I'll shoot the photo and I'll show you in a second. But the idea is when you go and shoot things, just having an arsenal of different types of photos that you can take. So in our case, we know that long exposure is an option. So I always bring a tripod with me. John, did you bring your tripod?
I don't need a tripod.
He's saying that the Lumix autofocus stabilization is superior and that he doesn't need a tripod. Yeah. Well,
if I set this to high stabilization, I can get dolly shots and gimbal shots, I promise you. Just like cut to the footage.
Cut to the footage. So you can probably tell, but it is raining right now. And I think to kind of avoid some of the rain, we're gonna quickly grab something to eat because we are starving. John's getting distracted by the
fashionable people here.
Some really fashionable people in Maseratis, or I don't know, whatever that car is. All the Japanese cars are different. The Toyotas, for example, that is a Toyota. Oh my gosh! But we do not have those types of Toyotas in North America. If you're feeling overwhelmed, one way to solve that is by showing up with an idea of kind of what you already want to shoot. But at the same time, there are still lots of options available. So the opposite of that is actually limiting what it is that you're shooting, or limiting the amount of gear that you're shooting with, which is a bad example today because we have the Lumix and the Canon that we're shooting on and extra lenses. But instead of shooting on a zoom lens, shoot on a prime lens, or choose a focal length that you want to shoot at, or choose one type of photography, one type of photo that you want to do and execute that really well, rather than feeling overwhelmed by a ton of different options.
Now, when I was in architecture school, one of the first projects we had was to design a laneway house for 2 occupants. Now, we were given certain restrictions to follow, where we could only make it so big, it could only be so many stories, and there was only allowed to be a certain number of rooms. Funny enough, the house that I designed was for an occupant who was a photographer and another who was a video game designer. And so I designed it in a way that played to the needs of each of these people, where I had spaces with lots of light for the photographer and spaces that were dark so that the game designer could kind of work on their computer and not be affected by the external light sources. Now, at first, that might sound boring, like why not just design the biggest mansion with the most number of spaces? But when you have an unlimited palette of tools to choose from, it can feel overwhelming, kind of like what you experience if you grab a high-end professional camera, which is why a lot of entry-level cameras tend to have fewer features and fewer dials. It's not that they can't necessarily have those features, it's just the demographic and the person that camera is designed for doesn't really need those features. So the constraints or the limitations are kind of what make the experience fun, or kind of what trigger your creativity to think outside the box and think, how can I use this camera that's been given to me to get a unique photo or to capture what it is that I want to capture? It's the limitations that really bring out the creativity.
One of the things that overwhelmed me about Japan was the food. Of course, the food is different, but it was the experience of finding food. Normally when I'm back home, I would just open up Google Maps and scroll until I find something that has a good rating. And the one thing that I noticed is that reviews here are different than reviews back home. Like if you were on Google Maps and you saw like a 2-star review or 3-star review, you would just never go there because you would assume that it's bad. But here that's kind of the norm. And so if you see like a 4-star review, that's really good. And if you see like the one we were at, it was a 4.9, which was really good. And of course it was really good. The food was amazing. Now, you may have noticed that the graphics that I'm using in this video are a little bit different than the ones that I use in my regular videos. And that's because, you know, we're on vacation here in Japan. I didn't want to use the same graphics that I use in my regular videos, but I also didn't want to recreate everything from scratch. And so that's where the sponsor of today's video comes in, and that's Motion Array.
Now, I'm not very good at After Effects. In fact, I suck at After Effects, but there are people who are really good and can do things like create Mogurt files, which you can then import into Premiere Pro, and these are templates that you can effectively customize and make the graphics look any way you want. Well, Motion Array has tons of Mogurt files, which you can use to create titles and graphics. And it's the same sort of thing that allowed me to do all the fun titles inside of this video, which normally if I had just done on my own would take me hours just to learn how to do, or I'd probably just crash and burn through the whole process. Or you edit inside of Final Cut and you're looking for templates. Well, Motion Array. Oh no, but I edit inside of DaVinci Resolve and I need macros to speed up my editing. Motion Array. But maybe you just do static photos and you like to edit inside of Photoshop, maybe add some textures or some overlays to create some visual interest for your Instagram posts. Well, Motion Array also has that.
The nice thing about Motion Array is that you don't have to create all of these assets from scratch. If you're looking for templates, plugins, I like to use overlays and kind of like film burn effects even in my regular videos, and that's where Motion Array is an absolutely great asset. So thanks Motion Array for sponsoring this video. Now back to photo tips and seeing if we can find a few more photos. Part of what has made this whole experience a little bit unsure. You found it? So John is looking for a very specific sign. It is not...
There should be a reveal right around this corner. You're so overexposed.
No, it's good. It's C-Log. It's C-Log 3. John is used to shooting in Lumix where he exposes everything for 0, and I'm just...
See it in like 10 seconds.
Okay, well, we're looking for a sign that crosses over the road. Believe it or not, it's none of these signs. It is apparently up ahead, according to the man from the hotel who just helped us out.
Yeah, so we cross and then we turn left.
We've been searching for this sign for 3 hours.
You're gonna make it sound so dumb.
Now apparently we know where. So for the last 20 minutes, we've known roughly where it is.
Been back this way.
I'm not convinced. I just want to do long exposures of like street people walking, and John. Oh, we found it. All right, I'm going close.
Sometimes I find myself shooting too many photos, and it's not because I want to shoot photos, but it's usually because I'm in an area where the lighting or the composition or the weather just isn't working for what it is I want to shoot. One example is if you're shooting in broad daylight and it's just washing out everything or making the shadows look a little bit too harsh. Sometimes I find myself overshooting to compensate for the fact that my photos aren't turning out the way that I want them to. Now, I found shooting at night in Japan to be extremely exciting because it was a totally different environment, a totally different weather scenario than what I was used to. Now, my preference would be to shoot at golden hour or at sunset, where you have that really nice lighting, and sometimes artificial lighting can be a little bit challenging, but also I find it very interesting. So sometimes going to a new location where the lighting is different, or going back to a spot where you've been to before, where the lighting and the time of day allow you to capture a different type of photo, can be something that unlocks your creativity and gives you more photo ideas.
One of the things that we're kind of at a disadvantage for right now is that we've never shot here. And if you're feeling overwhelmed or you're not sure where to shoot, sometimes shooting in a location where you've already shot is actually the better solution. One of the things that I found recently, having traveled to different areas that I've never been before, like recently where we were in Utah, we were in Miami, Iceland, and those were all places that I had never been. I didn't know what to shoot. I didn't know what looked good. But what we ended up doing is being in those locations for more than one day, for multiple days, so that the first day is kind of like feeling out, okay, what's good? You tend to overshoot because you're worried you're never gonna be back to that location. Second day, you kind of take it a little bit easier. And if you can do like 3 days or a week in one location, that really allows you to make sure the weather is looking good, test different lenses, all those things that we've talked about. So if you're really stuck, try going back to a location where you've been to before at a different time of day, at a different time of year. And I think we're gonna try and get a few more photos, but you can see by my hair, the rain is really, really wet. Go figure. It's funny because the best tip, if you don't know what to shoot or if you're overwhelmed, is really just to get out and shoot anything. Which is why at the end of every single video I say, go shoot photos. But if you enjoyed this one, if you found any of the tips helpful, let me know down in the comments below. And of course, until the next one, go shoot photos.